How's it going?
Yo, what's shaking?
Yo, yo.
What's going on? Okay. We're here today for the masterclass. Welcome to the big leagues, creating a sales culture of high performance and accountability.
Big
Uh,
leagues.
Oh yeah, it's going to be a good topic. Of course, want to start us off with a quick icebreaker. Food is on the brain right now.
Mm.
So, so the question of the day is going to be, what's a unique dish or food item you're excited to try, but like once you finally had it in hand or in stomach, like you found it underwhelming?
This is some backflips. Well, I've got I'll go first. I think that I'll answer on behalf of my son. So I have a 5-year-old, and he's really into sushi right now. And so he likes like the very colorful things. Like in particular, he likes like the fish eggs, or sorry, he likes how they look. And then like he always wants to order them because they look like little like like magical like gems balls or whatever. And then every time he eats them, he's like, "Ooh, man, that's really fishy." And then like 2 weeks later, he's like, "Oh yeah, I want those." And we're like, "Remember last time?" And he's like, "I still want them." So that's I feel that that's I probably have some of that in my own life, but that's definitely like Mikey's game. There is his eyes are bigger than his belly when it comes to fish eggs. What about you, Brian?
I would say, and I've heard such good things about this dish, but like the last time I had it, poutine. I've heard like it's like great, but I was just like, is this really just gravy and fries? So, I, like,
Oh man, all the Canadians are gonna like take
I
off from
know
the
I hate
from.
saying it, but like, maybe I just didn't get a good. It wasn't a good poutine dish. I can't remember where I had it, but I was like, okay,
This is it. This is it. What
yeah.
about you? What about you, Elliot?
For me, it was frog legs. Went to
Oh,
like this Chinese, like they called it dry pot type of spot.
Oh,
okay.
Was super excited about it. It looked real good, real appetizing, and it was good. I just expected something different. Like people say, it tastes like chicken, and they're right on the money with that. It's chicken with frog legs, and there's a lot more bones, and it's a pain in the ass to eat. That's all
There
I
you
gotta say
go.
about frog legs. Yeah,
All right. Gosh, we're just a bunch of whiners here.
yeah.
too picky. Okay, awesome. Thank you guys for sharing. Super excited to get into this content. The takeaways are going to be amazing. Of course, today's event is brought to you by the team here at Modern Sales Pros. For everybody not familiar, Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest and highest quality community for those in sales management, sales leadership, sales and revenue operations, and sales enablement, aka our Modern Sales Pros. Our mission is to create an environment for our members to answer questions they struggle to solve on their own and help them see around corners that they may not know about. We do that through live sessions like this, an online forum, and our quarterly summits. If you're not already a part of MSP, you're going to be invited to join after this event. Before we dive into the event, I'm going to go over some quick housekeeping notes. First of all, this event is being recorded. You're going to be able to access this recording and the key takeaways on the previous events page of the MSP website. Second, if there's any questions for our panelists today, please use the Q&A function or chat, and they're going to do their best to get them during the event. Okay, Pete, I'm going to hand things over to you now. Do some intros. Take it
Cool.
away.
Thanks, man. I am going to share my screen over here. I am super pumped to be talking about performance management. It's a topic that's near and dear to my heart. But for folks who are not familiar, I'm one of the founders of Atrium, and Atrium makes what we call data-driven sales management software. And so essentially, it's software that helps sales organizations, AESDR, AMCS, and managers use data to improve team performance. So to measure and manage and improve performance. That's what we do. So this topic here is near and dear to our heart. So for folks who are interested, we have an offer here for everyone today. I'm not wearing mine because I'm a goofball, but we have these wonderful sales nerd hoodies that are absolutely fantastic, and we've only given away north of 1,000 of them. They're very popular with folks. So if you'd like to get one of your own sales nerd hoodies, we're going to go ahead and drop a link in the chat here, and you can go ahead and sign up for those. All we ask for in exchange is a quick discovery chat with one of our account executives to talk about how you use data in your sales organization right now. So that's that. In terms of intros, we'll do me first, and then Brian, because age before beauty. Um, My name is Pete. I'm one of the founders of Atrium. But before Atrium, I started a recruiting software company called TalentBin that was acquired by Monster Worldwide in 2014. And that's really where I went from being kind of like a business generalist founder, kind of like didn't know what the hell I was doing with respect to sales and sales management. Went from that to sales manager, sales leader. Was responsible for around a 20-person sales organization when we got bought by Monster, and then was responsible for new product sales at Monster Worldwide after that. So hung out there for a couple of years, and then ended up writing a book on startup sales called Founding Sales, and then started Modern Sales Pros as well, and then Atrium. So that's a little bit on me. But more importantly, we are super pumped to have a lovely data driven sales management practitioner here joining me. Brian, you want to share with folks what you spend your time doing here at Atrium and kind of the roles that you've had before that so folks kind of know where you're coming from?
Yeah, sure. So at Atrium, what I do is I help sales teams and sales managers and go-to-market teams kind of align on their data that they're using to kind of manage their team and make sure that like things are going well. Before that, I was working at a company called Lever, and then before that, I played professional soccer for about 8 years. So yeah, I've been at Atrium for a little over 3 years now, or almost 3 years now, and yeah, it's been a fun ride, and it's fun seeing the product, grow and connecting with a ton of different sales leaders.
Yeah, I'm super pumped to have Brian here today because he really merges together kind of two really important themes in in our organization. One is of course like performance, performance excellence, and instrumentation, and as a professional soccer player for 8 years, knew a thing or two about that, both from an instrumentation standpoint and then from also a coaching and performance expectation standpoint. And then of course like the data driven sales piece of that as well. And then you mix those two things together, you get a delicious, a delicious concoction of data driven awesomeness. So I'm pumped to have Brian here chat with us today. So I think the first thing I want to talk about here is just kind of like throw down a gauntlet to folks around why it's so important to actively manage sales performance problems. And I think that the first thing, and a lot of organizations, especially in the last few years, have like preferred to kind of ignore performance problems and like not actively coach them because it's like, oh, I can hire more account executives because like there's lots of money available for hiring more people, and like if this person's not attaining, like maybe it's not a big deal, like maybe they'll get there, etc. But like I think and it can be way more comfortable to do that sort of thing versus like actively manage performance. And we kind of joke about this is that most sales managers would rather do anything but coach on sales performance issues. But I think the important thing is that you really, especially in kind of the current economic environment, it's super important to be tackling those things head on. And so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about why that's important to do and how to go about doing that. First, we're going to kind of talk about like some of the problems associated with this. We're going to like med pick this, right? We're going to talk about the problem and the implications associated with not tackling this problem. So like the first example of this would be like reps that don't cover their own costs. And so, let's say that you've got a corporate or a commercial AE team where maybe your account executives cost you from an on-target standpoint of 150K per year. Well, that ends up being around like 13K per month, even without kind of like the incremental burdening there. And so that's like how much cash they actually like require. And then moreover, if you think about what you would expect them to be delivering off of that, they should, you want to see 3, 4, 5 times that. And if they're not covering their own costs, like that's really problematic for the organization from a financial modeling standpoint. The other thing to kind of consider is, and this is the example of win rates right here. um, it, when you when you don't have a scarce lead generation environment, or like when opportunities are like plentiful and not scarce, you know it can be easier to not take into consideration the fact that lower performers are actively taking other people's at bats. But when lead generation is scarcer, who do you want to give the ball to? You want to give the ball to somebody who's got a 30% win rate or a 25% win rate, or do you want to give that same ball to somebody who's got a 10% win rate, right? And I think that's a really important thing for folks to consider. The other thing is that underperformance can actually be contagious. It's kind of one of those things where it can create a reality where you can have an individual who is underperforming, who can essentially pull down the level of performance from other folks in the organization. And not, I mean, and we would tell ourselves a story like, oh well, account executives are or SDRs are performance compensated. They shouldn't be, they like, in order to earn more commission, they should be driving higher performance, and they shouldn't care about other people's, other folks' lower performance. But humans are humans, and it just turns out that ends up not being the case. And you can definitely see people whose performance can degrade over time, kind of like lowering to the lowest common denominator. And then moreover, even bigger problem, of course, is that high performers, they honestly don't want to be in organizations that have that toleration of that lower performance. And so you have a situation where not only will it drag down some of your middle tier players, it'll like actively repulse your higher performers there. The other thing that can be problematic with respect to performance management is you can have problems in recruiting and onboarding. So if you're not actively managing performance, you can have people who, from a ramping standpoint, and this is a ramping view right here, never come into band. And so one of the things with respect to ramping, and we do master classes on data-driven ramping, is that there's kind of can be a point in time at which you could fix somebody in their ramp, like, as they're onboarding and as they're getting their act together and learning things. But if they get long in the tooth and they haven't had success, that can actually be a problematic self-reinforcing self-fulfilling prophecy. And so the time to act on that is earlier in the ramp versus later in the ramp. And if you don't proactively manage that and proactively performance management, that can kind of be a self-fulfilling prophecy there. And then I think the last thing that we're going to touch on here, second to last thing to touch on here, and this is especially important if you work in a venture-backed software company or an earlier stage company that needs to raise kind of future financing and what have you, is you can end up with what we call a broken numbers situation. Right, where if you have underperforming reps who aren't covering their own nut there, all that's going to do is create a situation where you have a higher cost of sales because the amount of revenue that's coming in as compared to the amount of money that's being spent on marketing and sales is a financial metric that is going to be evaluated by investors, whether it's private market investors or public market investors, in order to assess how efficient that the business is as a machine in pulling cash out of the market. And if you have a higher cost of sales as compared to the revenue that's coming in, that makes for a more capital intensive business because people are going to value that more lowly. And so a great example of this is underperformers who ramp slowly don't positively contribute to your business as quickly as they could. And then lastly, kind of just to round off the diatribe here on why it's so important to proactively performance management, it's like actively unfair to underperformers as well. A lot of folks a lot of managers, kind of as indicated earlier, are more comfortable putting their head in the sand and saying like, okay, well maybe this will resolve itself, what have you. I don't want to make this person feel bad, etc. But I think, kind of said differently, it's really just like not fair to not only is it not fair to the higher performers and other people in your team, it's also not fair to underperformers to not proactively coach them, not give them feedback, and not point them in the right direction, or alternatively, if they can't get there, to point them outside of the organization, because otherwise they're just kind of like wasting their time and efforts there. So that's a little bit of a diatribe on why it's so important to proactively manage performance there. Brian, I know that was a little bit of a monologue there, a lot of bit of a monologue. What are some of these things that kind of pop up that you've noticed in some of your customers and how they've tackled them?
I mean, I think to your point, like the slide of showing the car is like, it's just a lot of times we see that a lot of managers come from being reps. So it's hard to, it's like, it's hard to go and tackle rep performance problems because most of the time they're like, okay, let's focus on opportunities. Let's see how this op is progressing. Let's see what's going on. Like, do we have next steps on this? But not understanding, really looking at the data and saying, okay, where are we losing deals and why are we losing deals? Let's look at the conversion rates. Let's look at like new op inflow and make sure you actually have enough pipeline to actually hit your number. And they focus a lot more on the opportunities. And it's hard for them to actually even sometimes trust the data in Salesforce. Like, oh, well, this doesn't have activity data, or, it's a lot of times they're not really going into the data because they don't have a good understanding of what to actually look at and how to kind of back that data into an actual performance issue problem.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And I think that just kind of comes down to, I mean, one of the things that we talk about with our clients is manager enablement and like how do you get managers to get to a point where they can manage by metric and feel more comfortable and be more be more effective at like managing the player versus managing the play. That's like a phrase that my buddy Corey Bray likes to use. Is if you think about like coaches who are managing the play, if you were like, oh, okay, you did this play wrong. Well, that's fine. Or like, hey, run it this way. That's kind of like that's great for that one play right there. But if you have a player who recurrently runs a play wrong, or across all of their plays that they run, you know, doesn't run them at a high enough tempo or with a high enough like precision or what have you, that's a player thing, right? And so if we want to solve the problem of them having problematic plays, what we got to do is we got to fix the player first and foremost, because that's going to positively impact all the plays that they run. And so of course, in order for us to fix the player, we got to understand like what's going on with the player, what kind of the defect is there for us to then proactively coach them on that. Cool. So conveniently, this is something that Atrium helps with quite a bit. One of the things that we really have a strong opinion about is that managers should be managing by metric, and they should be bringing data and metrics into their managerial rhythm. And that it's such an important thing that it's something that should like deserves its own its own solution. And so the way that we say that is that organizations should provide their managers with a solution that has all the KPIs for reps and teams, should be proactively tracked, but not just has those KPIs in place, like your win rate and your average selling price and your deal cycle and how many meetings people are having and how many ops they own and what their pipe is on their forward pipe, all those sort of like meat and potato KPIs. But then moreover, it should be paying attention to those. It should be monitoring all of those KPIs in order to help managers proactively understand like, as Brian was noting earlier, hey, it's like we're halfway through the first month of the quarter and you're already tracking behind with respect to your number of ops that are going to SAO, right? Like that's a goal that we should be tracking. And moreover, like we should be proactively on top of that such that we don't show up in 90 days of the QBR and be like, oh, why did I get my ass handed to me this quarter? Instead, what we can do is we can say, oh, look, in in week 2, in week 4, we were tracking behind on this thing right here, such that we could intervene and tackle that. Because today's top of funnel is obviously like a month from now is mid funnel, and like today's mid funnel is going to be a month from now's bottom of funnel. And so proactively tracking progress on those things, making sure that that reps are engaging in sufficient quantity and quality of selling behavior in order to get that top of funnel and then move things along in the pipe to the mid funnel such that they can be in a good position to close is obviously super important. And so essentially that's what Atrium does is we help sales managers, leaders, and reps use metrics to improve team performance. We do this with hundreds of companies of all sizes. And so usually what ends up happening is organizations will see pretty substantial business impacts when they start really managing by metric using Atrium. Gainsight's a big customer of ours. They've used it to address pipeline hygiene and pipeline throughput issues on a per rep basis. Envoy is another great customer of ours. They doubled their meeting volume and reduced pipeline hygiene problems in a very substantial way after starting to manage more heavily by metric. Same with WorkRamp, et cetera. But it's modern sales organizations who are really looking to infuse their sales management motion with data and embed a culture of data-driven sales management. Are the sorts of organizations that we like to work with. So that's a little bit of an advertisement on Atrium, but let's go ahead and talk about dealing with these performance issues that we talked about above. We're going to kind of talk about kind of 4 ways of tackling this. One, got to make space to do the actual work, to do the actual managerial work. 2, we got to set clear expectations about levels of performance, and it's not just on outputs, it's got to be on inputs as well. And then 3, we got to make sure that we're adequately inspecting the data as managers or as leaders or as operations folks to help see when there's issues here. And then lastly, we got to make sure, once we've detected and diagnosed those issues, we got to make sure that we're actually managing, based on that information, that we're not kind of like, pulling this move right here and doing anything but managing that those issues there. So let's talk about kind of the this notion of having time on the calendar. One of the things that we joke about here at Atrium is calendar is destiny. And if you don't have space on the calendar for these things to get done, they're probably not going to happen. And so this is true with respect to management as well. This is an example of a set of like an operating rhythm, kind of composed of different meeting types that a manager would have with their AEs or with their SDRs. And this is something that, as a sales leader who's looking to systematize a sales management playbook, could think about formalizing across their team. So obviously there's pipeline reviews, it's pretty straightforward. This is something that most of the time AE managers don't need help reminding people to do this, and this is great. But this is quite a bit different than a rep-centric one-on-one that is focused on reviewing metrics and kind of progress on coaching initiatives. And so making sure that you have both of these things happening can be very powerful, because if you don't, as we kind of talked about earlier, deal discussion will generally crowd out all other discussion of performance topics there. And so if you reserve that one-on-one for those performance topics, like, hey, let's talk about how we're progressing towards those goals. Are there any coaching initiatives that we're focused on right now? This is the place where you're going to catch those issues, like you are light on SAO inflow, or you have fall off in mid-funnel. Let's tackle that. QBR meetings are another great example of this as well. But the way to almost kind of think about this is like the one-on-one is kind of like a baby QBR meeting. And so instead of this happens every 90 days. But of course, unfortunately, it's very substantially a look back situation. These happen maybe every 14 days. And essentially are like checkpoints on the way to this, such that we don't end up in our QBR looking back, seeing something that we probably could have caught 2 months ago, 6 weeks ago, 8 weeks ago, 10 weeks ago in a one-on-one, if we were using data in there. Brian, on the kind of like operating rhythm side of things here, any particular things you'd like to add here on how you've seen your clients effectively implement like a good sales management motion?
Well, at least with Atrium, they send a lot of stuff out via email or via Slack. The one thing I do want to kind of touch on too is when you have like the feedback loop, if you can go one back, Pete. One thing that I thought was kind of cool, when you kind of look at the feedback loop, it's not always just on like performance issues of like a rep not doing well, but like, for example, we were noticing with I was leading the sales cycle, and we noticed that a rep was having fewer days between op touches compared to everyone else on the team. And what the manager did was like, hey,
seems like
why
a
are
good thing.
you like, yeah, why, like, what are you doing different? Like, why do you have so many fewer days between op touches? It was the same thing with an SDR manager where he had one rep had a higher email engagement rate. And the one thing that he asked that top performer to do is to CC, like, kind of how we have it with like a sales engineering, or CC something where they could actually see that, and some of the reps could see some of those
Yep.
conversations
Yep.
and
Yep.
understand, like, oh wow, look, they're touching these ops, like he's getting an in between touch on these ops, or he's
Mhm.
doing more targeted emails with this specific kind of like subject on
Mhm.
those, and then kind of making that like more of a um custom, is like making that like kind of a playbook for like the whole team to start using, and seeing like the email engagement start to go up for everyone on the team, like looking at the trended data and seeing that going up, and same with like the data that's being optimized. So it's not just like performance issues, but it's the opposite too of like, okay,
Yeah.
what are
Upside.
reps doing really well? Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's a really good thing. And I think, yeah, you got so and this is oftentimes where people, um, I think one of the reasons why folks are sometimes can be afraid of proactively managing performance and talking about performance is because they think it's only negative stuff, right? They think it's only constructive stuff versus also kind of catching positive things as well. And like the only way you're going to catch those positive things is if you're paying attention to stuff, right? Like I think a couple of different things that you called out there was, here is an SDR that has a higher email engagement rate, a higher email responsiveness rate. Well, we have to be paying attention to those metrics in order to say like, whoa, this guy like is kicking butt. Okay, my next action here is I should have him or her share that information with everybody else. I think that's fantastic. Um, Number two, when it comes to dealing with performance issues and kind of like more proactively managing performances, just setting clear expectations. Like you'd be shocked how organizations say like, okay, cool, here's your quota, you're an SDR, you're supposed to generate this many opportunities per month, or you're an account executive, you're supposed to generate this many bookings per month or per quarter. But just providing a mechanism by which account executives and SDRs can kind of see the connection between the inputs and the outputs of their efforts, and then providing guidelines on the quantity and quality of those behaviors can be extremely powerful. Um, because if you're just leaving it up to the SDRs or the AEs to kind of like figure that out on their own, well, like that's a recipe for non-success, right? Like, hey, cool, like I want you to give me 50K in bookings a month. Have fun, go figure it out, right? Versus being more specific about it from an input standpoint, like, hey, look, we're targeting 50K in bookings per month at our average selling price. What that would probably look like is, our average selling price is around 20K, for our deals. So that means that we need about 2.5 deals per month. Generally speaking, we've got like a 20% win rate, and so that means that we've got to have at least like 11 or 12 deals that are getting to sales accepted in order for us to have a shot at those 2.5 deals. And generally speaking, this is the total number of meetings that you're probably going to be having on a per deal basis. It's like 2, 3, or 4 there. So, and moreover, we should probably be seeing about like 10 to 15 customer facing meetings per week. Great. Like we just described, like, is anything in there aside from like bookings and quota? Is anything in there like hard and fast? Like, hey man, I'm going to fire you if you don't have more than like if you don't have more than 15 customer facing meetings. No, not really. But it's just kind of guidelines on, cool, this is like, these are the general parameters and the physics of our business. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to set goals on that in order to understand, hey, look, we're halfway through this month and your new opportunity inflow is lighter than we would expect it to be and lighter than your peers. Let's tackle that now versus in 4 weeks or in 6 weeks after it's too late to fix anything. And so these would be examples of like why it's so important to set clear expectations about these kind of both input and output metrics, because you don't want people to be caught on the back foot. Brian, when you think about like the KPIs that your clients use in Atrium in order to kind of measure the quantity and quality of selling behavior and proactively manage selling performance, what are kind of like your favorite ones there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's I love looking at like doing kind of a backwards analysis of like time from stage to one, but also
Mhm.
mixing that with the conversion between or their win rates from stage. So understanding, okay, if I get a certain number of opportunities to this stage, and I know it takes this much time to close one a deal from that stage, I need to know, and this is my quota, I need to know how much pipeline I need to have to
Mhm.
actually hit that number. And it's really
Mhm.
interesting, like when you start to get that in front of the AEs as well, to kind of show them that math.
Mhm.
And this is all stuff that we kind of do within our sales motion of like, this is what a rep needs to be doing, and this is what they need to be thinking about to actually hit their quarterly number. Because a lot of times, reps starting like, okay, I'm in a new quarter, like I got to scramble and figure out what's actually going to close this quarter, what's actually going to be happening. And
Yeah.
like actually having that math and those numbers being like, well, like if I know that I got this quarter or like this month, and like these are all progressing this way, then it actually makes it a lot easier. It's a lot less scrambling in the beginning of the quarter.
Yeah, totally. And I think that this is something that we've been talking about more and more with our customers, is this notion of making sure that you are setting up next quarter for success. And the way that you make sure that you're setting up next quarter for success is by making sure that you have a sufficient amount of top of funnel right now, and then mid funnel right now, to set yourself up for success, next quarter. Because like once you're in, for the most part, unless you're in a very, very transactional sales motion, um, the quarter is where it is. It's more about like managing deals to close. And you don't want to be in a situation where you're on the back foot there. And so of course the mechanism by which you do that is by saying, okay, how are we doing with respect to our new opportunity inflow? How are we doing with respect to our pipeline that is progressing to a certain stage, right? Not stage 4, like how much pipe is getting to stage 2 or stage 3, because that's like today's stage 3 pipe is going to be stage 5 pipe, a month from now, or maybe 45 days from now, or what have you. And so making sure that we're appropriately bird dogging that right now, such that we can catch potential issues, ends up being a really powerful thing there. Cool. So set clear expectations. Great. So then the next thing we got to do is we actually got to inspect the data. We got to use the data. And so what that means is making sure that we have adequate reporting in place that's going to be available for the managers to consume. Obviously, we're a big fan of data-driven sales management software that's specific to this problem, but there's other ways that organizations approach this away, kind of legacy ways of doing it via legacy BI and kind of things like that. But really, what we want our managers and our leaders to be doing is just using that data in order to make sure that we're tracking the ways that we would want to be with respect to those inputs and outputs that we talked about just a second ago. And so what that means, of course, is like visualizing that and understanding like, hey, here's this rep right here, he's a lot higher than everybody else, that's awesome, I wonder why. Maybe we chat about that. And then also, the kind of the flip side, hey, this person's really light with respect to their customer facing meeting volume. And then looking at trends as well, like, hey, this person's deteriorating, why is that the case, and like, let's get ahead of that. This is one of the reasons why we're big fans of what we call anomaly detection here at Atrium. And so kind of a really important thing that really important functionality that Atrium has is statistically monitoring all those KPIs, such that you don't necessarily have to use your eyeballs, but instead something like the software does it for you. As an example, this individual right here has 40% fewer new opportunities coming into their pipe than their peers. Right? That's obviously pretty important. Like if we care about, let's say that we've got a 90-day sales cycle, and this rep in the trailing 30 days has half as many ops coming into their pipe than their peers, we better get our arms around that, or it's going to be a real problem in 90 days from now. And there's probably not going to be much that we can do about it unless we tackle that as soon as possible there. One of the things that we actually have these metrics decision tree charts, flow charts that we like to give out to folks that help managers understand the relationship between various KPIs and their inputs. But the idea here is that if what you want to understand is like to catch an issue, if you see an issue, you want to kind of like look right on this chart. So, as an example, where do bookings come from? Bookings come from wins crossed with average sales price crossed with deal cycle. Okay, great. Where do wins come from? Wins come from win rate crossed with attempt. So as an example, if we're worried about how our bookings are pacing, right, or how our forecast is looking. Well, what we might do is say, hey, is this a wins problem? Right. In our example earlier, are we getting our 2.5 wins? Oh, we are. Okay. Well, then that sounds like maybe it's an average sales cycle problem. Is it an an average sales price problem? Oh, is it? Oh, yeah, it is. Right. Instead of closing 20K deals, this rep has been closing 10K deals. Right. But like 3 10K deals is not, it's not our 50K or 60K quota. It's 30K. Okay. Where's this coming from? Well, let's go ahead and go right. Cool. Is it because their average opportunity size and pipe is too small? Or is it maybe like a discounting problem? Or is it maybe like a win rate on large opportunities? Like these would be the next thing that we would go ahead and investigate. But the first thing is we have to know like we got a problem. What's the next thing associated with that? And then downstream where that might come from. And then the kind of like last thing I want to touch on here is and actually before I progress on that, Brian, I want to ask you on this, like what I just kind of described right there isn't maybe like the most natural and kind of like easiest thing in the world for a lot of folks, but it becomes like more and more intuitive the more and more that you do it. What are some of your recommendations for getting good at this kind of like diagnosis workflow that I'm describing here?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I had this exact thing, just like I mean, you send this out, so like we have one, we send it to a lot of our prospects and customers. Yeah, there it is. I just keep that on my desk and like, oh, okay. Like when I'm like trying to build up an alert feed or a dashboard, I'm noticing a rep is having like a wins problem. Like I just kind of go through this and like just check the different metrics or KPIs and just see which one's flagging. So just kind of having this in front of you. But once you start to look at it and like start to understand it, it's almost like you're doing geometry. It's like you're doing a proof, and it's yeah, you get used
Totally.
to it.
Yeah, you do get used to it, and it just becomes kind of like second nature. And I think it's kind of importantly, we definitely see this with our customers. They just become like very intuitive. They're like, oh, okay, here's like this SDR has an opportunity creation problem, but it seems like their activity is where it needs to be. That seems like it's like if their quantity is there, seems like maybe there's a quality problem. Okay, let's go ahead and inspect the quality metrics, and those would be things like email response rate, right, or multi-threading, or touches per account. Like, are they doing things well versus doing a lot? Oh, or the flip side is like, okay, cool. They've got an output issues. Are they doing enough activity? Oh, okay. Guess what? They're not doing enough activity. Where is that coming from? Oh, in a very common case here with SDRs is like, oh, they're doing a bunch of email, but guess what? They're not calling at all. Okay, great. Right.
Mhm.
Like let's go ahead and tackle that. And so people just become very facile with like kind of understanding like where the hiccup might be, right? Like diagnosing that kind of like a doctor. And then just coaching on it. And then I think that kind of goes to our next point here, which is if you're doing a good job at this, right, and catching those things, like, hey, I got an SDR and he or she seems like they're maybe a little reticent to call, right? Or hey, I've got an account executive and he or she seems like they've got a pipe hygiene problem or what have you. Well, the CRO at SalesLoft has this fantastic phrase. Uh, let's not admire a problem, right? Don't
Mhm.
admire a problem, right? Like let's go ahead and tackle it. And so the mechanism by which to do that, of course, is management, right? We gotta talk about these things, have a conversation on this topic. And again, like like management is a craft and it's its own behavior, and the same way that like getting good at doing push-ups or getting good at doing pull-ups or getting good at Brian's an amazing Pelotoner, but like getting good at Peloton is really just about like practice and repetition and improvement. The same is true with like performance conversations, conversations that might feel difficult or awkward or what have you to start. After you've had 20 of them, it's just like water off a duck's back, and this right here, like manager to rep conversation, is the unit of management. Right? The same way that like the unit, like the fundamental unit of selling is a customer facing meeting. The fundamental unit of management is like communication from a manager to a report or a rep. and like two-way communication, right? And that's verbally synchronous, not like via Slack, like like this. So that's a really important thing to do. And so when you think about what that would look like in practice, these are some of the kind of steps, kind of some of the recommendations and best practices there. One, you definitely want to give feedback frequently and immediately. Like you can't wait like 2 weeks. Like, oh, okay, cool. I just watched a chorus call and this rep completely like, didn't set an agenda, didn't do a time check, didn't set an agenda, right? Just kind of like, clearly didn't do their pre-call planning. Like I'm not going to wait like a week or 2 weeks to provide that coaching. I'm going to, hit that rep up and be like, hey man, I was observing this, like, it seems like you didn't have seems like you didn't have sufficient time for like pre-call planning here or what have you, because I observed this, and this. What was the issue there? Oh yeah, I was running from like meeting to meeting and I didn't have the chance to do that. Oh, okay, got it. Well, here would be my recommendation would be to like block times, before your meetings and after your meetings, such that you can get yourself in the right headspace, make sure that you're dialed in for that, and then also make sure that you have the time availability to do the appropriate follow-up. Marketing spends a lot of money and a lot of SDR labor on getting these meetings on the calendar for us, and we really got to make sure that we're putting our best foot forward there. How does that work for you? Oh yeah, you're totally right. This one kind of came up out of nowhere, but I'll do a better job of calendar management in the future. Great. Let's back check that in a week and make sure that that's actually happening. And I'm gonna pop on your calendar later this week to make sure to audit that. Wonderful, right? Like good coaching behavior showing up right there. Like you see it when the problem pops up, provide a recommendation there, open with positivity, right? We got to like document the problem in question, ask them where it might be coming from, and then kind of propose a recommendation there. But then also make sure that there's going to be a back check in. And so like that loop that I was just describing, that should just be happening constantly, right, on a recurring basis. And it's just like the more you're doing those loops, like the better off like that player is going to be. Um, and like it always cracks me up, and I'm sure Brian, like this was something that was just like part of your life when you were a professional soccer player, but like the notion of like a player coming off a field and like not getting like coaching, right, on like how they're doing, especially in the practice environment, right, but like how they're doing and like how they're feeling, and providing some recommendations, but instead like waiting a week or whatever, it just kind of seems pretty bananas. When you think about like the most impactful ways that your coaches have provided kind of like feedback and made sure that they're being helping you improve, what are some of the ways that you've seen that apply to sales management here?
Yeah, I mean, when it's immediate, it makes you realize that they actually care and they actually want you to get better. If it's like a week later and you realize like, shoot, like maybe they're not seeing me in the team here. And it's also kind of like similar earlier, like if they're pulling you aside and they're like, hey, watch how this person's doing this. Like this is how I want you to do this. It's like it's very helpful to get like the example of like, oh, this is what it should look like. This is what my email should look like. This is how I should be interacting with opportunities. It's the same thing. So the immediate feedback is definitely really helpful. Some people say it might be kind of big brothery, but like if they're doing it right, then you don't have to do the immediate feedback. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what's the alternative? Like, as you were just pointing out, like, I'm not going to give you immediate feedback. In fact, I'm just going to be checked out on you. And in fact, like, now we're going to trade you to another team.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I think it's kind of like, what is it? The opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is indifference. Right. So like, you definitely you don't want to show indifference to your staff, and you don't want to show, and if your manager is showing indifference to you, like, that's obviously like not a great look. Cool. So then some of the ways to make sure that that these conversations are happening in a proactive fashion. One, just make sure that you're having that one-on-one on a recurring. Just make sure that you're having a one-on-one on a recurring basis. One, like the recommendation I like there is every 2 weeks, but again, it's not pipeline management. Like, so every like a half hour every 2 weeks is focused on coaching topics, and something that's like paying attention to goal progress, and not focus on deals, not including deals, et cetera, et cetera. So those are things that making sure that those meetings are happening, and then moreover that they're being documented. It doesn't have to be really formal. It can just be a Google Doc there, making sure that like you're talking about things. And then moreover, if you find yourself in a situation where, ideally, the notion of a performance improvement plan, like the PIP, if you will, um, is almost like a legacy of the time before we had good data-driven sales management. The reason why you would do a PIP is because like you realize that there's a big problem, and it's been so like the problem has been so substantial for so long that now it's a really big thing that needs to be addressed, versus if we're continuously improving performance by measuring it and talking about it in those every 2 week one-on-ones. One, like, we never get to this. Instead, like, one, we make our staff better through better coaching and through better performance management. Or two, if it's like pretty clear every 2 weeks, like the behavior hasn't improved, the behavior hasn't improved, the behavior hasn't improved, the behavior hasn't improved. Well, at that point, like, we don't need a performance improvement plan. We've been managing performance all along, and it seems that this individual is not able to like remediate their behavior or improve their performance in alignment with the coaching and management that's being provided. And so it's probably an opportunity to like offboard them at that point. Like, we don't need a highfalutin performance improvement plan if we've been doing our performance management all along. And so then the last thing I kind of want to touch on here is just around like evaluating folks and kind of like being candid about performance management. And so a good example of this is like if you're trying to understand who on your team maybe needs offboarding, or maybe needs more proactive performance management work. There's the traditional concept of will versus skill, right? Where will, of course, is like level of effort. Like, is this person in it to win it? Are they locked in, or are they, conversely, are they checked out? And then, of course, skill is essentially just like, the level of acumen on their behaviors, and that, like, these are measured with different KPIs. So like a will measurement might be just like activity, like customer facing meeting volumes, email volumes, call volumes, prospecting behavior, et cetera, et cetera. And then of course skill is like conversion metrics. With SDRs, it's email responsiveness rates, touches per account, conversion rates from account touches or contact touches to opportunity creation, kind of things like that. And then and so if you have those two kind of concepts, then it becomes a question of saying, okay, for folks who have will and skill issues, well, that obviously, is kind of like takes the cake there. You got somebody who's like not putting in the calories and has low acumen. Well, we could try to upskill them, but like honestly, if they're checked out, probably no reason to do so. Right. So like these are folks that like probably would be useful to like really, consider offboarding. The next folks would be folks that have will deficits. Um, you know, again, when you've got a rep who isn't putting in the calories, usually that's indicative of either A, like they don't like the role in general, or maybe they don't like this specific role, right? Like they're not into your product, or you're like, for whatever reason, like it's not jiving. It's oftentimes pretty challenging to surmount will deficits, right? Because like it's pretty hard to motivate folks that are unmotivated. Lastly, in the skill situation, having folks who are high will, right, but have skill deficits, well, those are great opportunities for coaching folks up, right? Coaching folks up, and because if they're putting in the calories, usually that's a good indicator that they give a hoot, and that they'll be responsive to feedback and responsive to coaching there. Brian, anything you wanted to add on that?
I don't think so. No, this is like, yeah,
Okay.
pretty in check. Like if the rep is doing the meetings and they're doing the work and it's just like a quality, it's a lot easier to coach and kind of help them get along. But if they're not doing it, then it's hard to.
Yep,
Yeah.
for sure. Cool. Well, I think that's everything that we wanted to cover today. So for folks who are interested, go ahead and get yourself one of our Sales Nerd hoodies here. We're going to go ahead and drop the link here for folks that go ahead and sign up for that. go ahead and grab that. And then Elliot, anything else that we need to cover?
No, that's it. I'm gonna wrap us up now, guys. First of all, I want to thank everyone for attending. Big thank you to our sponsor of today's event, Atrium. Make sure to check them out. Of course, links are in the chat for some goodies and to check them out. Big shout out to Peter and Brian for providing the content of today. Recordings and key takeaways are going to be available on our page shortly. Don't forget to check out our upcoming events. And we'll see you guys next time. Take care.
Thanks,
Thanks.
man. Bye, guys.
Bye.